Okay, I went and did a run. I got one more. So I've had one run today. Out of two offers, one was just a horrible, horrible DoorDash offer. The DoorDash company does not treat their dashers very well. It's pretty wild, some of the things they'll act like you should do. And once or twice, more than once or twice that I've missed them, but once or twice that I knew I was missing them. You know, sometimes you're missing an offer because you're on your way driving and you can't really be paying attention to that thing while you're making a certain turn or whatever, even to glance barely off to the side of the screen. But once or twice when I knew I was missing an offer, I'm thinking, that was a terrible offer. Why would I take that? And they always send you message that says, oh, you missed an opportunity and now that opportunity will go to someone else. I'm like, okay. You send that horrible thing you're trying to convince someone to do where they're hurting themselves by taking that offer to someone else. I'm really upset about that. They have a lot of things that programmed in. I know all tech companies are like this. They do all this programming and they're sort of anti-human, transhuman, whatever you want to call it. They're like, you should do these things. We should convince you to do these things. Look at the psychological tricks of the way we send you messages. Look at how this is supposed to be. You're like, okay, y'all go with that, whatever. I want to live in a different world than the way y'all want to live. So anyway, I have had at least one horrible, horrible offer this morning. It was just ridiculous. And I did definitely turn it down. I'm not driving millions of miles out into the countryside for 50 cents a mile and then have to drive all the way back for free. But anyway, I've had my one offer. Made like $6 today for my 2 hours out here so far. And that's just the way it is. It's a bad economy. Not that many people are going to be ordering. And to be honest, it's better that not many people are ordering. It's so ironic and crazy to me. I'm out here trying to do this delivery thing, not because I think people should be eating this way, really the opposite. Obviously, I'm not going up to their door and getting on my soapbox and telling them how unhealthy their food is, but it's a strange irony that I'm out here doing this and I'm delivering food to people that I would not put inside my body for anything. I've been a lot of years trying to be healthy and I have some idea what works and what doesn't, and obviously not enough idea since I'm now at this age, at 54, struggling so hard with how much my health has gone downhill again in the last few years. But going back to my story, before I did the offer, I was reading about the cytokine storm and some guesses and some knowledge. That's a lot of that when you're looking at things that have not been proven. And honestly, I don't know if all of them can be proven ever. But over the years I've learned, you see a lot of things that people pretend have great data to back them up, and they actually don't. They don't have good data at all. 99 to 100% of psych meds are not tested in the ways to the extent that people think they are. I know as a person who's been greatly harmed with the side effects of psych meds in the past sometimes. It's just the way it is. The people who study these things, not the people in general, but a few people who have looked into these things have some very interesting things to say about how these really large companies will justify doing a thing when they already know internally in their company that the thing it's not good. It's going to hurt a bunch of people, and they do it anyway, and then everybody gets hurt. Or they know they don't have the evidence that they're twisting their marketing around, just like make it look like it's supposed to be a certain thing, and it's not really that thing. So I run around wishing people wouldn't eat anything from, certainly most fast food places, but also as really just not restaurants. All the restaurants are using what they call restaurant oil, corn oil, soy oil, restaurant oil, vegetable oil. Oh, there's other names for it too. There's so many of what I think a lot of people in the carnivore community now, in the keto community, call seed oils. And I don't love it that we call it seed oils, but I get it. You need things that are easy to understand and latch onto, and if people just avoid all seed oils, they'll be off of all that stuff. I'm personally not really opposed to a couple of the plant-based oils, depending on the source you get them from, and depending on how the processing was done to get the oil out of the plants. And so I know most people don't need to get that deep into it, just avoid seed oils. And I probably need to avoid most seed oils even when they are better made, just because I seem to have such a high need for Uh, well, like whatever the differences are between grass-fed meat and not grass-fed meat, which are apparently currently believed to be very tiny, but I can feel a difference in how well I feel on grass-fed meat versus conventional meat, which is great when you're struggling so hard financially and actually fasting part of each month just to survive. But the food you need to eat is so expensive. And it wasn't as bad for years and years and years while I was learning and doing these things. I would buy a half a cow and have it in a giant freezer, and it was really not actually bad financially at all. But we lost a house in a fire, and we moved to Florida, and also 2020 was all happening during that time period, and things are different now. Learning to get hooked up with farmers and find any good farmers in Florida is very different. Florida has an extremely harsh gardening and farming situation, and there's fewer great people that I can buy from down here compared to when I lived in Ohio. And I'm in a very different situation financially. So buying where you have to pay for it all at once, first of all, if I could get a new freezer, that would cost money, but also to pay for the half a cow all at once ahead of time is also an issue at this point. And then to go buy better meat inside of a grocery store is wild. It's just financially insane. So that's a big issue. But I'm rambling all over and I keep losing my train of thought. I'm so sorry. I went into a Publix. I bought some better meat. I came out here. I'm sitting in front of a McDonald's. McDonald's has Wi-Fi. And it's a place that I might get another order soon. And I want to talk about the cytokine storm that I keep veering off track from. When I got COVID, I looked into, as was suggested by someone I was reading, all the things that are natural that might contribute to you might get a cytokine storm. And I made sure if I had any of those things in the house not to have them at all. I think one of them was chocolate, and we had some organic cocoa nibs or something in the house and different things like that. We usually had some form of chocolate in the house, and my kids would eat it when they were growing up more than I would. And I usually always had raw local honey in the house, and I don't remember if honey was on the list for the cytokine storm, but I'm pretty sure I didn't have any honey during the time that I had COVID. I was sick for exactly 2.5 weeks. I did not ever get the cough. I got a lot of weird stuff going on. I kept getting tingly and pins and needles in my hands and my feet. They kept going to sleep. And I did call my doctor back and talk to him about that, and he said it was because of the way that COVID was distributing fat cells where they weren't supposed to be and causing bad circulation, which I already had terrible circulation all my life. So for terrible circulation, and the pins and needles in my hands and feet kept going to sleep, and that was really scaring me, actually. And I'm, like I've mentioned earlier, I'm not usually fearful of anything, and I kept thinking, ugh. Very aware. I'm a more information kind of girl, and I don't like not knowing what's going on, not knowing what the end result will be. Not to know for sure. There's millions of things in life you can't know, but to at least get an idea, to at least be trying to inform yourself and have a clue, have a basis for trying to develop your own decisions, and even to know which way to go researching something. You need to kind of keep trying to educate yourself. And I always feel a lot better when I'm able to find information than I do when I'm just going, what is this? I don't know what it is. I don't know what to do here. So you see a doctor and the doctor's like, we don't know, which I've had said to me like 1,000,000 times in my life. We don't know. Doctors don't say it that way, of course, mostly because they have to work so hard not to say things exactly like that. They say a lot of things that make you think that you're crazy and that you're not really having anything, or you're having it all only in your own head. Doctors are willing to do a lot of harm, and they're willing to really mistreat people a lot. Most of them. So I don't trust doctors. We've already covered that. After COVID reaction went as badly as it went, and during that, especially the whole year of 2020 after the lockdowns had started, I think I really went to an extreme in my head and in my emotions. It's still pretty extreme in my head. I mean, we look at people knowing the history now of Johns Hopkins and how the Reimer boys were abused, knowing seeing everything playing out day by day with doctors willing to mutilate people before they're old enough to have any such thing as informed consent. There's so many things piling on. And I had also been following the stories for years when there was occasionally stories of what we call medical kidnapping. There are a few good doctors in the world, and when I could, if I ever could, find a few of these good doctors, I would be willing to see them. But I think they're very rare. And I'm almost to the point now I would not want to be medicalized no matter what. Like, I could be in a car crash. I wish I would have a medical bracelet on saying I do not agree, I do not consent to go into that hospital and get treated. Because, the moment you go in the hospital, you're on antibiotics, you're on a glucose IV, you're on all kinds of things that are just essentially going to have thousands of pounds of bad side effects. Things that some of us can't afford. Our health cannot take the hit of all of the ways the doctors are willing to hurt us. And I have recently seen a few doctors, and sometimes in really high positions in the political scheme of things, telling things like, oh, and the greatest tragedy of it all was now people don't trust their doctor. I don't think that was the greatest tragedy of what happened in COVID reaction. I think the killing people who were dropping dead with no reason and were having heart attacks at very young ages, and very clearly associated that the data and the truth has been coming out, and a lot more is going to come out in the future probably. The killing people, I think that was worse than the fact that I don't trust you. But, they got to have their narratives. They got to have reasons. They're really trying to convince people to think in a certain way. And sadly for them, I think most people prefer to engage their brains and notice things like, maybe you should be more upset about the deaths. Maybe that's something that should bother your conscience. So I covered that I didn't eat the things that were that would cause a cytokine storm. I had a relatively easy time with COVID, I suppose. I was sick for exactly 2.5 weeks. To the day I got better is the day my daughter got sick. My youngest still lived with me in the house. She was, I think 2020 is the year she turned 20. And it's very typical throughout time that if I get sick, I get it first. I get everything. Like I said, I have this weird and wacky immune system. I've had it all my life. Sometimes I've joked with my friends or family that my immune system never met a germ it didn't want to explore a closer relationship with. I knew from the first moment it had been in the news that there was all of this going on in terms of there's this thing, it's in a different country, is it going to come to America, what are we doing, what are we going to do? It's the way virus. Sorry about the road noise. I have the windows down to get a little natural light in the side. For the morning light, it's good for people, for natural sunlight to hit your eyeballs. Anyway, I knew the way viruses move and how mobile our society is across the world nowadays, it's going to come here. That's the way that happens. It might be delayed some because we for a little while had a bit of a moratorium or whatever you want to call it on traveling, which made sense, but I knew it would still come eventually. And I knew the moment it came that I would get it, because not only because of my immune system, but also because I had a job that I was working at the time in Ohio with a very, very mobile population, a very higher wealth crowd of people buying driver's ed for their kids. And there was a lot of international travel in and out of that community. And it just made perfect sense to me to realize that it was an extremely high likelihood that I would get it very early on. And as I said, it was like the day the lockdowns were announced, or a day later, that I got sick. My daughter got it, and typical to this pattern I mentioned, that I would get things first and then other people in my household, their immune system might hold out longer, but they still might get them later after it took a while with me. She stayed sick longer. Part of that is my kids say I'm very hardcore, that I would just do whatever I have to do for my health, whether it was unpleasant or people thought it was weird or whatever. Just, hey, if this is what's going to keep me from being sick or being in pain, or at least reduce my pain levels, I'm going to do it. So I'm much more strict and hardcore in my way that I treat myself than they are, and that's okay. I don't mind. Like, I kept the raw local honey for them, and they had honey in their diet even when I did not. But I did pretty well with it, and interestingly enough, my daughter also did not get the cough part of it. She did not get the pins and needles I got, or at least not very much. I can't remember if maybe she got it once or twice. But both of us, the worst thing we had with it was headache. I think it was 3 days or 4 days. I think it was 4 days. I had a really, really, really bad headache for a few days that I couldn't even touch it. I have been headache prone all my life, and I usually can deal with my headaches and even migraines in very non-side effect treatments of, alternative and complementary care type things that you might try, like essential oils, take an Epsom salts bath, get a massage, whatever you can do. There's a million things on the list people could try, and I have found that there is no one natural remedy I can do that takes care of every headache. I think I must be prone to a lot of different types of headaches, like I just get them easily no matter what type of headache they are. But if you have the whole toolbox full of all these things to try, you try it, and you try the next thing, and you try the next thing. And I went quite a few years through there that I did not ever take even anything over the counter for headaches, hardly ever. I actually had, during those years, a prescription. Well, the first half of those years, I had a prescription for something, I think it was called Fioricet, and it had a barbiturate medication in it, which the doctor I had at the time knew had helped me once with a migraine. And I mostly kept it just as, like, this is the safety net. I could take it if I needed it. And at some point that went away because they went through all this crazy political whatever with how corrupt and bad the politics within medicine are, that, oh, well, we're getting people addicted to drugs, and now we're just not going to give painkillers to anybody. So I had used it occasionally over the years, I'm sure at least a couple times a year. But most of the headaches I would get coming on really often, I would try other things first, and most of them I would deal with other things. So I was never buying an over-the-counter thing. I had the Fioricet in my purse that would just stay there with most of the 30 pills in it until it expired, and I'd get a new one, whatever that was, a year or 2 or 3 later. I was really not happy with the psychological, emotional feeling of it when the doctors are then like, oh, can't give out that anymore no matter what, because I don't want to get you hooked on this thing that you've kept in your purse and allowed to expire. So go figure. You can't be the responsible person in a society that encourages so much irresponsibility and so much lack of taking responsibility for yourself that our society encourages. You have to try to be the responsible person, but society will treat you like you are irresponsible. And then it's not like I disagree that they had to do something about all the addiction problems they were creating. That was bad. And I have known some people who probably had a pretty bad problem in that way. I'm not saying people who talked to me about it or admitted they had a problem, just things where the signs were there. And in fact, actually back in the 80s, I don't know for sure, I was a teenager at the time, but I suspect my dad was guilty of doctor shopping for all his pain problems. But anyway, I had the COVID experience, and later in the summer I lost my brother that year, my only brother. He was 2 years older than me up until he passed away. Then in October of that year, we lost a house in a fire. It wasn't a single family house at that point. My daughter and I were living in a townhouse that we lived in after we had given up the house that she had always lived in since she was born. Was given up after my husband had left, and 3 years of dragging through the courts that he took us through. And then we gave up that house at the end when the divorce was final. So I think we'd been in the townhouse a year and a half to 2 years, and then, you know how in an apartment complex you have a line of whatever, this building, and each one, if it's townhouses, might be a whole line of townhouses in each building. The fire started in a unit, I think 2 doors down from us. Yeah, 2 doors down. We woke up at about 5 in the morning. I think it was a Saturday morning, if I remember correctly. My daughter woke up first. I'm a very, very heavy sleeper. I had the weird experience that when my son was born, who's in his 30s now, I just immediately would wake up if he even changed his breathing in the middle of the night. And had mom brain wake up syndrome, let's call it, all those years. And I was raising kids and raising kids and raising kids. And then my youngest, who I mentioned still lived with me, still does live with me now, she still lived with me in 2020. And it was almost exactly when she turned 18, like this thing just shut off. Like I went back to being a heavy sleeper. It was so weird. So I was not waking up at first during that fire. Of course, there were fire alarms going off in the houses next to us, but with the big firewalls, the unit next to us, but with the big firewalls, they're not that easy to hear. The fire alarm wasn't going off in our unit yet. There was a lot of ruckus going on outside, let's call it, and that was the summer that, for whatever reason, a lot of crazy and or evil people in our country were really happy to make excuses for like 200 cities across America burning down all summer. So there were scary things going on in America. Like, well, my daughter is more prone to being scared than I am. So all this rioting had been going on all summer, and people doing things like shooting cops in the head and just disgusting, horrible behavior, where you'd get on social media or the people who would bother to go to mainstream as if that was a source for anything, be like, oh, it's mostly peaceful. I know it looks like you're seeing the city burning down behind me, but that's peaceful. So all of those of us who did not care to pretend that the emperor had clothes on were not real happy with that. And my daughter has a pretty good head on her shoulders, and also, as I mentioned, she's much more prone to be fearful, I think, really a lot more. And she had heard shouting and woken up, and there were people outside screaming, oddly enough not saying the word fire, but as you tend to get emotional, and they were cussing. There was a lot of cussing going on outside of our doors. They were yelling to get out of the house. So it sounds like a command, you have to get out of your house. And there was effing this and effing that and effing get out of the house. And it scared her. She thought it was a riot. And she thought, like, the riots have come to our door. And the thing she had the presence of mind to do was to come get me. And she woke me up, and I still had enough mom brain left to, like, I could hear the scary in her voice, and it was getting me up. And it was like all within 1 second or less of, I'm raising up, I'm grabbing my phone, I'm listening to her, I'm moving towards the window to see what's going on, hearing and realizing all this stuff all in a nanosecond. So I'm looking out the window that looks, my bedroom looked out the back end of the townhouse, and I was dialing 911 as I'm doing it. All of this was so close together. Like, it was like 1 second of movement and thought and realization. And I could see flames as I got my head far enough around to, like, look way down out that window. So it happened so quickly I couldn't even say which is first. Either I first said it to her or I first said something to 911, but I did dial 911. The fire trucks were so close to where we lived at the time. I was calling to get help, and I think I was the first person because everybody else was focused on banging on doors and screaming and trying to wake everybody else up. So I called 911, and the fire truck started coming, and I was saying to Lisa, we got to get out. Go get your shoes and your coat. We're leaving. And of course, because she thought there was rioting outside, her first thought wasn't, oh yeah, let's go out the door. But she does generally really trust me and feel safe around me. And I was just able to put on the really, really, really firm mom voice and say those things to her and get her moving enough that it didn't take much of a delay of a second or two to get her going. She didn't really pull her head together enough out of the being scared to do all the things I told her to do as far as get your coat, get your shoes, but we did get out the door. I went out the door, and our neighbor was out in front, this young man, him and his wife, and their little baby lived a few doors down. They were on the other side of the one where the fire started. He was standing there with just his underwear on, some kind of that thing that's halfway in between tighty whities and boxers. And I guess it just surprised me. I opened the door and I was like, whoa, what am I looking at? Just a nanosecond reaction. It didn't take more than a brief flit across my face, but he saw it and he was so embarrassed, and he was like, oh, I'm sorry, I don't usually run around out here like this. I was like, it's okay, it's a fire. You're doing the right thing, you're trying to get us out, don't you worry about that. So we got out, everybody got out. This man and his wife and their baby had gotten out before we did, because I think their unit probably, was on the other side, but right next door to the one where the fire started. And their unit had been filling with smoke, because the way the firewalls years ago had been is they just went up to the top of the second floor, but not in the attic. So like a flame going through the attic could have a spark that went to the other, over the firewall. So their unit was getting a little more damage. Anyway, the woman who had they did decide later, accidentally started the fire, died in the fire. There was a lot of investigation at first about arson from a bunch of different angles. Several different separate independent investigations were going on for a few days, but they said it was an accident. That poor woman did not get out. Her son did. 3-year-old son got out. He had jumped out the window and somebody had caught him from below. But there was a lot to go through, of course, and I didn't mean to get into it in a big way, but just, it's hard to describe what you go through. Something that's so sudden and that you never planned on and that you didn't know ahead of time was going to happen. You couldn't have known, and it's a really odd experience. And then it was still 2020. That was October of 2020, and there were apartments all over the place advertised, and every time we'd call on one, nothing. People would set up an appointment and they would not show up because of this crazy evil nonsense of the agenda to cause people to look at their fellow humans as disease vectors. So we were lucky enough, blessed that someone from church was letting us stay with them short term. I should have had more patience with that. I was very grateful, and yet I still didn't feel completely comfortable with the idea of staying there for very long. So after a while looking for apartments, I did just decide, I've wanted to move south for my health for a long time. Maybe now's the time to do it. At first I tried not to let myself think that way, because they say when you've gone through something huge, you don't make a huge life decision right in the aftermath of the trauma, but I did. I tried not to, and then after a few weeks I was like, we gotta go. So we went to Florida. It was really good for my health in terms of the one thing I had never been able to conquer was I was still having really bad seasonal depression, really, really bad. Seasonal affective disorder. That got so much better down here in Florida. And then I later, since I got here, got onto the carnivore diet, and that improved my just general mood control, mood stability. It's so weird now having zero, it seems to me now zero extra impacts or zero chemical impacts of anything chemically wrong in my body or in my brain to cause what you want to say, quote unquote, a depression. And life is still hard. Life still has problems. You still have to face things that worry you or that are hard to face or that are frustrating. And there's all kinds of negative emotions in life. So unusual and different. Experiencing life in a way where we're having such a hard time in some ways that I think from a worldly perspective would look like we're just failing. We're the lowest of the low. We're dropping off the bottom of the ladder of success. We're not doing great. But to face it and just know God still loves me, and if we become homeless, and God will still love me then. And to not have what we're going to call chemical effects. When people used to talk so much about the chemicals in the brain being the cause of depression, not sure that's true. I definitely don't think we should look at it as if it's like a deficiency of a drug that might affect how serotonin's taken up and all that stuff. But it's so different now. It's so odd for the first time in my life being a person who there's so little of any of that extra impact. I don't even want to say there's none, because I'm not doing perfectly. There's a lot of stress in our life right now, and there's a lot of concern, but oh well, it's beautiful. There's natural light outside. I'm looking out the window of the car where I have it a little bit open right here and seeing the blue sky and loving it, and loving a lot of things in life in terms of life can be good. It doesn't feel like that when you're depressed. It doesn't feel like that when you have intrusive thoughts. It doesn't feel like that when those thoughts are dark. I'm very familiar with not wanting to be here on earth. Been there a lot in my life. I love people. I love God. I love my family. I'm so thankful for my daughter who still lives in me, although I'd love for her to move on in her life in the way she wants to. She would like to have children and be married and all that. And we'll be thrilled for her when that happens at some point, but at the moment just still super grateful that she's here with me and that she actually needs me at the moment. I'm not happy for her problems with her health, but she followed me into the carnivore diet, and it has greatly reduced the number of migraines she's getting. So that's interesting. She used to be, for several years in a row, she was getting debilitating migraines, and She would be down as much as 5 out of 7 days of the week with debilitating migraines that were just absolutely interfering with her ability to do anything. And now she's maybe down to like 1 a month. Unfortunately, she does not believe that she can succeed. She does not believe that something really deep inside. She's used to she loves God, but she accepts that she can't. And she accepts that when she tries, something will happen, which I can relate to. I can actually really, really understand that. I have a great deal of sympathy for it. Although, of course, as a mom, I also want to push her to try again in the future. I'm wondering if Sears chronic inflammatory response syndrome might be an answer for me. I'm wondering if it's also affecting her. So a lot of puzzle pieces to put together, a lot of things worth figuring out, but hopefully, I hope God has a plan for the the thing that you get to after you've been allowed to have to suffer at Satan's hands. But Satan is here. Satan has things he does, and he gets us. I learned over the years to look at a lot of those dark thoughts, a lot of the things that you think when you're depressed, and they don't all feel the same. They're not all the extreme dark depressive thoughts. But I learned to look at all of that stuff as that's the lies of Satan whispering in my ear. And they still come a little here and there because of what I think is starting to make sense, and a lot of people have been talking about lately. I don't know what we'll have data for later, but it does definitely make sense to me. What they're talking about in this is that inflammation could be causing all this. It could be inflammation throughout my nervous system that was always causing all of that. And I mean, I know I've got the health history to look at to know I have so much autoimmunity going on. It's just crazy. And it's kind of just almost embarrassing. Like now I'm talking as if people in the public might see this video going, I'm pretty wacky. Oh my goodness, it's irritating. I don't know, maybe that's weird, but it's in my personality that I don't like having things that stop me from doing. I would rather be a person who does things. And if I'm trying to do something physical and I have to hesitate because I'm afraid I'm going to get hurt, that just upsets me to no end. When just walking could be an uneven ground hike, a little bit of elevation to it, and I can't do those much anymore. Although I used to love to hike when I was younger with a friend I lived near Stone Mountain when I was a teenager, and we would go hike up the mountain a lot, me and my one friend. Now, if I'm just trying to do something like, say there's this tiny bit of elevation change or some roots on the pathway, and I'm feeling the hesitation that I get physically when I'm like having to be extra careful as this old middle-aged woman with fibromyalgia and all of the physical degeneration, weak as a kitten I am nowadays, I get so frustrated with it. And I think I always was probably too impatient, even with other people who didn't have that go thing that I wanted to go keep doing things. And like people would act like, oh, we can't do that, or oh, I'm afraid of that, and I would feel like, why are we being held back from going to have an adventure because you said you're afraid? What? I was probably not sympathetic enough towards that kind of thing. And now when I, over the years, have gotten worse and worse and worse physically, and I've felt myself being hesitant about something, I just hate it. And it gets me where I get mad, which probably makes no sense, but psychologically I get really mad sometimes. And my daughter is the one, that my youngest, that she'll put up with it and be pretty good to the way she'll respond to me, to handle me. If I'm getting frustrated and mad, I'll be like, I can't do this. I'm much better now, being willing to ask, hey, can you open this jar? Hey, can you reach that thing? Hey, can you do this or that for me? Now I'm actually pretty pathetic now, asking for help all the time. But when I get mad about it, sometimes I just want to just kind of grit my teeth and be like, Rrr. During the time that I've had the diagnosis of, I thought it was all fibromyalgia, which is fine. Call it that. I didn't find out till I was 47, but everything they said about it fit. After I got that official diagnosis from a doctor at the Columbus Arthritis Center, I think it was called, in Columbus, Ohio. Anyway, that was when I was 47. I got the diagnosis. It all fit. And since then, I've had a few of those moments, gritting my teeth and saying, this is just a ridiculous disease. It's so irritating. It's so stupid. But it is what it is. Muscle weakening is one of the things, and I'm as weak as a kitten. It's horrible. It's ridiculous how bad I am now with that. When I was young, I liked to lift weights in my later years in high school and first year of college. I did some light weightlifting. As I mentioned, I used to hike up Stone Mountain with my friend in high school. We lived very, very near Stone Mountain at the time. And over the years, it's just happened more and more that I would do things, and then this started actually around age 13 or 14, the first time it ever happened, but I would get some kind of huge physical backlash. And quite often it was just not even being able to hardly move a day or two later. Have you the thing where if a person's lifting weights, they're supposed to, people think it's normal that they're supposed to be sore later if they worked out right. And then you have I guess the next day you're sore, maybe 2 days, and then you're better. Mine was always sort of like on a 1 day delay past where it was supposed to be, which I always thought was really odd. But even when I didn't know, it was as weird as it ends up being how bad I am physically. When I was young and lifting weights, I would usually not feel sore the next day, and then another day later I would feel really sore. And then it would last for at least 2 days, usually 3. Pretty extreme how sore it would be on days 2 and 3. And I kept having this thing, like I said, starting when I was 13 or 14 of extreme backlash that would happen physically after exertion. And I know different times I'd be trying to work out in this way or that way over those next several years into my early 20s and mid 20s, and people would be like, Cheryl, you're just overdoing it. You're doing too much. And it never made sense to me. How can I be overdoing it when it never felt like I was exerting myself that much, when it felt fine while I was doing it and enjoyable to exert myself? How could that be overdoing it where there's no sensation for me to be able to perceive to say this might be too much? And it really wasn't when I was young that anything that I could perceive. And I've learned over the years, it's a different feeling. It's not like, I know what it feels like if you are doing something that requires aerobic health and it's too much for you. I know what it feels like if you're trying to lift a weight that's too heavy. I know what it feels like if you've done too many reps. I think I know what the sensations and feedback to my mind from my body is that is more normal than most people get. But what I've learned over the years is a different thing that I learned to know. If I do this next thing, if I wash this next dish, I'm going to be sick tomorrow. And a lot of times I've had this where I'm just sick and I just can be so weak and so, well, I can't even describe it all. There's a million things that go with it, but you just can't even get out of bed. And sometimes it lasts a couple days, and sometimes it lasts a few months, that you literally can barely move and can barely function like a human at all. So this thing that I think of in my mind as exercise intolerance was not really answered by the diagnosis of fibromyalgia. Now, as I understand it, I think it is answered by the diagnosis of chronic inflammatory response syndrome, which I've probably always been a person who my body couldn't process what's happening when I'm getting exposed to biotoxins. And I think at different levels throughout my lifetime, I've had whatever exposures that I couldn't handle, and that's why I've gone in and out of some really weird symptoms at times. Sometimes kind of long term. This last one, obviously long term. I've lived in Florida 4 years. I've been going downhill the whole time I've been here in various ways. Obviously not in the one way of the winter depression thing. That's gone. But I was getting some depression here in Florida. Not the winter depression thing and not as severe, but something different that was just occasional little bouts of depression. And then when I went on carnivores, when those went away. All of it's so strange and sounds like there's so much sort of almost contradictory stuff. I think it probably sounds contradictory to a lot of people, and I'm just trying to put the pieces of the puzzle together and figure them out. And having brain fog, not being able to think it through as well, not being able to put sentences together as well, not being able to write a script and think through what else should I say to the camera, and just getting on here and rambling. It's crazy. But I'm going to try. I'm going to keep trying. I've been babbling for 40 minutes on this particular stent. And I'm going to try. I haven't even posted anything ever yet. If I can get it posted, I need to figure out, I suppose, making channels on certain platforms that are just for the posting the content, and not one that's mixed up with, having a playlist of music to help with insomnia or whatever other playlists might exist on my thing, which I don't remember what they all are. But maybe I need to probably have a separate email for that, then have those separate channels. I got to think through the right way to do that and start getting some things posted if I'm gonna really use it as something that's posted to have this documentation. Anyway, I mentioned earlier I feel better this morning. I generally have my best times in the morning. And I generally don't do so great through the afternoons, have little bits of, it's not good enough, and then I usually have a point in time later in the afternoon that I just crash. And I have been doing this for years now, and I figured it went with the fibromyalgia. I guess it also can go with the chronic inflammatory response, that I just don't do things in the evenings. It's extremely rare for me to do anything to be out in the evening. I go home. I'm having this thing that's like the Middle Ages. They had the two sleeps and the what they call the watch in between the two sleeps. I go to bed really, really, really early if I can. This doesn't happen every day, but if I think I can fall asleep, I get in bed like in the evening at a time when everybody else would think that is crazy. What is she, like 100 years old? Why is she going to bed that early? But I go to bed and I get whatever amount of sleep I can get, whether it's 2 hours or 4 hours or 6 hours. And I know that from experience, I know very well from years of experience, that if I stayed up till midnight or 10 at night or 2 in the morning, it would not change the fact that I would wake up during the night roughly around the same time I would have woken up if I hadn't stayed up that late. So I go to bed super early. I get however many hours of sleep that's able to add up to, and then I'm awake. And then if I can go back to sleep, which I can't always, but sometimes I can, then I go back to sleep and I get more sleep after. So I'm going to try to come up with a list of sort of topics I'd like to talk about. Many of them I might have already touched on here, but maybe talk about them a little more in depth, and also make myself some videos that are just, this is a topic. I'm interested in chatting about this. If anyone's ever going to see any of my videos, I'll have this amount of time on this thing. And then when I have this amount of time on this thing, just cut it off and have a video posted on it when I get to posting videos, which I made videos 3 times today, this morning, in between the camera glitching out one time and then later having a delivery in between. And then once I figure out the way to get things posted and have the channel to post them on, then I will put up the first one, then I'll put up parts of today, maybe one each day or one in a week or whatever it takes to get a few out there. And every now and then I'll stop and record again, record a few more videos. And here I am with a brain that doesn't function all that great, going, oh, and I'm at the end, and how to say goodbye to the audience that I don't have and don't know that I'll ever get. Doesn't matter. It's okay. I hope that it can do some good for someone. If you're out there, I care about you. I care for the health and the healing and the comfort that people need to find. And if you actually have listened to this thing, all this rambling, I appreciate that too. Thank you.